Thank you for joining us today to discuss the green recovery in the Chilterns. My name is Elaine King and I'm Chief Executive at the Chilterns Conservation Board. This event is part of our work on developing partnerships and building collaboration across the Chilterns. The Chilterns Conservation Board is a public body and we were established to conserve and enhance nature, to help people understand and enjoy the Chilterns AONB and to foster the economic well-being of communities. And one of our key roles is to develop a management plan. Here's the management plan, if you haven't seen it before. And we can't deliver this on our own. And so we work in partnership with people like yourselves, ensuring that we are collectively more than the sum of our parts. So it's really wonderful to have so many people involved with this event today. Normally, of course, we'd be in a room together, but inevitably we have to be virtually connected instead. But there also lies an opportunity. I chaired a landscape conference on Tuesday, and the passion, the knowledge and the energy of the speakers really shone through, but also that of the audience. The discussions in the chat was fantastic, and so I would urge you to use the chat function today throughout the session, share your views, connect with each other, and members of the staff team are also involved, so they'll be able to talk to you and answer your questions, as well as the main questions that our panel will be discussing in the session. So do use the Q&A function as well to ask specific questions. Many of you have submitted some really great questions and we'll be asking the panel some of those, along with keeping an eye on the questions coming in as the session progresses. Do also tweet using the hashtag Chilterns Green Recovery, and we'll be recording this session live. So in advance of today's event, I've been reflecting on what a green recovery means to me. Green suggests nature, though nature is blue too, in rivers and seas, but it's about so much more. A green recovery is about the health of nature, but also the health of our whole planet and the health of society. This includes thriving businesses, vibrant communities, and everyone feeling a strong sense of well-being, a sense of place, and a sense of being valued. People and communities. For example, we have huge opportunity to make key long-lasting decisions for the natural environment with a current legislative window, which includes the Agriculture Bill and the Environment Bill. And presidency of the G7 and COP26 next year gives the government the opportunity to demonstrate global leadership on the environment. And the Landscapes Review was published a year ago. This is my rather well-thumbed, scruffy copy, and that advocates that protected landscapes be more for people and more for nature, and we expect the government to respond to the report by the end of this year. And at the same time, COVID-19 demands bold action to secure the health of people, communities and businesses, and not least because it exposed more than ever the inequalities in our society. So there couldn't be a more timely moment to come together to discuss a green recovery in the Chilterns. And I'm very pleased to welcome Howard Davies, who will be chairing our panel discussion today. Howard will also introduce our expert panel. Howard is Chief Executive of our parent body, the National Association of AONBs. We are one of 34 areas of outstanding natural beauty in England. Howard is a passionate advocate of landscape and a champion of the interrelationship between people, place and identity. Thank you. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you very much, Elaine, and thank you everybody really for involving me in a sort of debate and discussion like this. I think it's really easy to get bogged down and stuck at your desk. Many of us haven't left or moved far from home over the last 6-7 months, and it's really nice to actually dip into another area, albeit virtually. So thanks, Elaine. I'm really grateful, and I've seen the list of both speakers and guests, delegates, and it's a real privilege to be part of this. So thank you. So what I'll do, I'll just give you a few seconds of my thoughts, then I'll introduce the speakers. And then I'll ask the same question of each speaker to sort of open the question and answer session up. And then we will move through the questions that have been submitted. But I think even down to the discussion speakers and some of the speakers and I were having before the meeting, we talk about this new normal, and I'm really not quite sure what this new normal is. It's clearly a really difficult time for people and businesses, both on a personal level and at a societal level. And our aspirations, or the aspirations of many people to get back to normal, leave me a little bit puzzled. I think we've currently got a really clear insight into the way that we're completely entangled, our relationship between food and farming and how that links together, our need for green space, the importance of family and friends and so on, and the fact that everything is absolutely interconnected. And many of us understand the notion of entanglement, even if we don't really know how to unpick it. And some of us, and I use the term collectively, don't actually get it at all. So I think we're witnessing a really transformative event, and getting back to normal isn't on the cards at all. We know that strategic policy is under pressure, when really what matters to most people is what's happening at the really local, the hyper-local in many cases. How do we react to local problems? How do we actually keep businesses running? How do we keep people serviced in the way they need to be serviced? We're very much entering a period of the hyper-local, so strategy is suffering. And I think just before I introduce the speakers, to say that never before has diversity mattered as much as it does now. We need innovation, and innovation only happens where thinking overlaps, where an engineer might meet a doctor or a farmer meets an IT specialist. It doesn't happen when the same groups of people talk to each other to try and resolve a problem over and over again. We need a new diversity of thinking at all levels in government, from Westminster to Cardiff, to Stormont, to AONB partnerships, to national park authorities, and to conservation boards. So we need to get that scale of approach right, and we need that diversity of thinking. But despite all of these difficulties, there's some really huge opportunities, and there's much talk about a green recovery. And as ever, that means a lot of things, a lot of different things to different people. So I'm probably not going to say any more than that, other than to introduce the panel. Some panel members I've known for a fair length of time, some less so, but it's really great to work with you. I'd like to first introduce Estelle Bailey. Estelle is Chief Exec of the Berks, Bucks and Oxen Wildlife Trust, and is probably familiar to you all. Before that, she was Chief Executive of Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust, and someone I know has a deep interest in nature recovery. Welcome, Estelle.
Hello.
I'm going to move on. Thank you. I'll come back to you all with individual questions, but welcome, Estelle. Thank you. I'd next like to introduce Jonathan Smales. He's the founder and CEO of Human Nature, a sustainable development campaigning business that designs and builds sustainable communities. Jonathan is, or was previously, the managing director of Greenpeace and has over 30 years experience in sustainable development. So welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Then, good morning. Then to Marian Spain, probably familiar to many of you. Marian is Chief Executive of Natural England, the statutory advisor on the natural environment in England, previously Chief Executive of Plant Life International, but has a long association with designated landscapes. She's been a member of Natural England's board, a Secretary of State appointee on the New Forest National Park Authority. So very familiar with the work that's going on in designated landscapes. And Pauline Walsh, Chief Executive of Affinity Water, a company that supplies water to homes across three distinct areas and separate areas of England, parts of Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Essex, Greater London, Hertfordshire and Surrey, part of Essex, which includes part of the Dedham Vale AONB, I think, and part of Kent. She's been previously Director of Gas Transmission for National Grid and has held leadership roles in a number of companies that include the Ford Motor Company and Philips Electronics, to name but a few. And welcome to the panel. We also have in the background Ellie Stout, who's the head of grants for the Rothschild Foundation, who's offered to, she's not speaking, but she's offered to post information and links into the chat thread, as the environment is clearly one of the foundation's current priorities, and they're really interested in supporting the green recovery. So whilst Ellie won't be saying anything. I welcome Ellie as well, and it's really great to have you all here. So welcome to the panel. I think if we start with a question that I will ask everybody in turn, just to really break the ice. I'll start with Estelle, and I hope you don't mind, but you're top of my screen. So how do you, and you can't move, I'm afraid, so you will be there for most of the time. So how do you believe that we can best work together to ensure a green recovery in the Chilterns? So a very wide and open question. Estelle.
Well, it is very wise, Howard, and I've thought long and hard about this. And I thought, well, we should probably start with the bigger sort of political frame and then sort of work it down. I know we've talked about local, you've talked about local a lot this morning, and I think that's probably where the main drive is going to have to come from. But I think let's just set the kind of backdrop here, what a green recovery actually is and what it means. So I think that the environment sector has got behind three main points for what they believe a green recovery is. And that's investment in low carbon economy, investment in natural capital and ecosystem services. We've got to absolutely have that. So that's investment in nature and its assets, basically. And greener law and policy setting, avoiding deregulation. And I think that's one of the areas that gives me greatest concern right at the moment, while we're debating the agriculture bill, the environment bill. We've got the planning white paper, and all of the other stuff sort of bubbling alongside of it. We've got Boris's build, build, build. We've got the green recovery, his 10-point green recovery plan. And none of them, there's a kind of bit of a disjointed message that's coming through that. They don't kind of sit together very comfortably. So when I think about the Chilterns and the opportunities there, it's a landscape. Obviously, it's a big, huge landscape. And I was reading a little bit more about it this morning. Thinking, this is absolutely amazing, the scale of this place. It's a beautiful place, we all know that. And I was really surprised then to look at kind of how the landscape worked, how it functioned. And thinking that, most of it was actually farmed land. So well over 60%, which is kind of, true of a lot of the UK. But then I thought, well, how does this then relate to a green recovery? And the opportunities there, okay, there's the working in partnership, but if land is farmed very specifically, then that relates directly to national policy and legislation development at the moment, and the way that is shaping up. And I have to say, I was massively disappointed, I'm sure everybody was, to see that the amendments of the Lords got kicked out by MPs the other night for better welfare standards, better environmental protection, which was absolutely shocking. And kind of that's where a lot of the issues for me lie in this. We've got the environment bill with net gain, which could be great, but considering the scale of development which is coming to the Chilterns, actually, will that really work? And that's a whole other conversation in itself around that major infrastructure development and how we make that work spatially for everybody, building a low carbon economy and such things, and planning for people better in all of that. But there's key elements missing out of all of those bills that are coming through at the moment, the national policies, and what we then want to see happen on the ground. And it's really hard to see a way through if we don't get the national infrastructure there around elms, for example, that's coming through, this public money for public good, nature in agriculture. And, if it doesn't then translate better for nature on the ground, and we need this investment in natural capital. We are in a nature and climate emergency. There's no two ways about it. We've got limited time to act. We are at nature's tipping point. And there is a sense of urgency around this. So it's like, how do we respond locally on the ground? And it feels like the local communities and businesses are actually taking almost law into their own hands in a way and saying, well, actually, we demand better. We know this needs to happen. The political frame isn't quite working for us at the moment. So how do we make that work? And for me, there's we have to work in partnership now across landscapes, particularly, and Chilterns, it's an iconic landscape. There's so much to offer. Tourism is the mainstay. We know that, you trade on nature, you trade on beauty. AONBs are a landscape designation, and we know that, we've got the Glove report, but a step change is needed. More investment is needed in AONBs full stop if we're to reach this target that Boris has now suggested of 30% of land protected for nature. So, you know, we need more investment into our landscapes vitally for nature and for people. So I think it's definitely all to play for. You know, the bigger political frame is going to impact on this, and we have a low population around this area, but mass development. You know, we are looking at this kind of the southeast as a massive issue of a, you know, kind of dense population, but an influx of perhaps more people. So it's just marrying all of this off together, and, you know, that balanced approach. How do we work with nature to get that green recovery? And, you know, there's all sorts of different ways that we can do that around job creation, looking at stimulating the green economy locally. There's a whole mix that we can talk about today.
Thank you, Estelle. A really powerful response. Thank you. So I'm going to ask the same question of Jonathan, and just to remind you, it's how do you believe we can best work together to ensure a green recovery in the Chilterns? Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Howard and Estelle. I'd like to start with the philosophy of it, really, so that I think sometimes we think we're trying to solve the same problem as one another, and then realize when we come up with the action list that we're not. And so for me, the philosophical framing of this, the principles involved are really key. So what do we mean by green, and what do we mean by recovery? And then I've got my little to-do list at the end, which was part of the brief that we were given in advance. So for me, it starts with the fact that clearly there's a public health crisis now, and we recognize it as a crisis. And simultaneously, we're recognizing, I think, for the first time as a global society, that there's a climate change crisis, a catastrophe that's already happening, and that there's a similar corresponding and related crisis in the natural world. And these are things that are not solved through housekeeping or a little bit changing our behavior a little bit. They're actually fundamentally associated with the way that we organize our economy, our transport, our farming, our energy generation. It's embedded in everything that we do in our economy. And I think we must acknowledge that it's not an environmental problem. Just because of the word green, it doesn't mean that it's all to do with nature. It's actually a human problem. It's a problem of the way that we organize things. And that's why sustainability is still actually the key framing word for this. It's addressing the environmental imperative using economic instruments and with social inclusivity is critical to the whole thing. Without that, none of those pillars can work on their own. The third thing for me is that there's a huge upside in addressing these crises. It's not, it always comes across as a sort of doom and gloom downside, but the upside is that nearly all of the actions for me that we need to take to address these crises are all good things anyway. The kind of farming that we need to do, the change in transport, the change in land use planning, they're all very, not just defensible, they're actually incredibly exciting agendas in their own right, even if these crises didn't exist. And so addressing this upside of down, having that front of mind for me is critical, a sort of front foot positive assertion of how much more we can achieve when we decide to address these problems. And finally, when we're looking at development and recovery, we often talk about the negative impacts, the footprint. And really what we ought to be talking about philosophically is the handprint, is how regenerative this investment must be, can be, should be, rather than just how to minimize the negative impacts. So onto the to-do list for the Chilterns, probably as for anywhere else. These are big ticket items, but as Greta Thunberg says, we don't want your hope, we want your actions. It is time for action now. So for me, the first thing is we need huge biospheres of green infrastructure. We need to connect woodland, we need to plant more, we need new forests at that kind of scale, and wetlands, and grasslands, and the edges of farms, rewilded farms. I'll come to farming again in a moment. On a meta scale and across the country, that we stitch these together, this an extraordinary, the sort of Marshall Plan for nature, and the benefits of that everyone will feel in terms of access to open space, quality of environment, clean air. Up to a third of all of the historic carbon emissions can be addressed through restoring degraded natural environments. The second thing is regenerative farming, and it's an often used term. For me, what it really means is smaller farms, more intense farms, mixed farms. It links with how we feed ourselves in the future, post-Brexit, and the whole idea of hyper-local, Howard, as you put it, the notion of local farming for local consumption, again, will be a terrific boost to local economies, to farming itself, to local employment, quality of food, and indeed for the natural environment. So regenerative farming and a massive investment. A lot of that will be more intense farming, actually, with greenhouses and shelters where we grow food more intensively. And that will be more compact and require less land than extensive farming does at the moment. We need that land for other things. The third thing is compact mixed-use developments, walkable neighborhoods, not urban sprawl, not car dependent, but designed right from the very beginning to be walkable, to be cycle friendly, to have local services, again, the hyper-local, it's a great agenda. We're hearing about the 15-minute city in Paris, but we often don't talk about where the majority of development happens, which is, intensification, urban extensions, small new settlements, which your area is going to, I think, suffer from a great deal in the next 30 years, unless this whole framing is changed. Two more. In the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, which is a key part of your area, 1 million houses in 30 years. I may not get the numbers quite right, but it's of that sort of order. You should build a city the size of Copenhagen. That would only deal with about half of them. It would use about 1/5 of the land of a distributed scheme. It could be the greenest city in the world and the most livable city in the world, and a much more efficient, economically deliverable and more sustainable way of achieving the housing that is badly needed in this area. And then finally, and the kind of obvious one really, but a county-wide network linked into dense local networks of safe cycle routes. We have to cross the threshold of when cycling becomes the alpha mode of movement for short journeys. It's something like 80% of all car journeys are less than 5 kilometers, i.e. they're very cyclable by and large, particularly with electric bikes and electric cargo bikes. And we need that investment, not just in country lanes or dedicated cycle routes off-piste, as it were, but actually on main carriageways. It's one of the easiest things to achieve and to invest in, and the most obvious. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, and some really, really stimulating insight there. I just as an observation, both your suggestions and those of Estelle's are all about significant landscape change. So maybe that's something we can pick up later on. So yeah, I'd like to move to Marian now to ask the same question. How do you believe we can best work together to ensure a green recovery here in the Chilterns?
It's interesting, isn't it, Howard, listening to what others are saying, and even listening to you and Elaine in your introductions. And I think what's in my mind front and foremost at the moment about all of this, this is an opportunity to make significant change and to grasp that radical change and not be afraid of it. And I was interested that Elaine mentioned the Glover Review a moment ago, a real wake-up call for all of us who work in protected landscapes, and coronavirus has given us another one, hasn't it? The shift in public and political attitudes and the shift to our whole society. So hopefully that's going to be my theme, slightly challenging, slightly grasping nettles, taking opportunities. I will also just take this opportunity before I launch into my thing to apologise that I have to duck out of the session early. My colleague Andy Smith will take over, and by a pure topical chance, the reason I'm ducking out is to join a DEFRA meeting about the Glover Review. So if I get the chance, I'll reflect on what I hear on this call as well into that meeting. I also find myself thinking about significant change and being bold and being brave, because one of the things the Chilterns is famous for, or certainly famous in my mind, was the reintroduction of the red kite 30 years ago. That was a really big, bold step, wasn't it? That it may only be one bird, but it is a bird that is now commonplace, having been almost extinct. And it is also a bird that is symbolic because it is iconic, because it is about change. So that's my theme, I think, for the Chilterns: be bold, be brave. What's the next red kite? And I don't literally mean a bird, but let's think about something really bold and iconic and brave like that. The specific point about green recovery for me, the way I think about this is I always find myself thinking, what will success look like if we have a truly green recovery for the nation and for the Chilterns? What will life look like in 5-10 years' time? And I think I'm going to look at that through 3 lenses. I want to look at that through a social lens, through an economic lens, and through an environmental lens. The social lens for me has to be about levelling up access to the natural environment. We know anyway, don't we? Because we read the data, we read the research, and you may have seen yet more gloomy data from Natural England yesterday, shocking data about the inequalities of access to the environment for children from BAME minorities and from our poorest households. We've known this for some time, we've seen the data, and coronavirus has made it really, really stark. So for me, there's a massive opportunity for the Chilterns to lead in this idea of levelling up access. Geographically, the communities you have around you, of all of our designated areas, you have some of our biggest communities and our most diverse communities. In Reading, in Luton, in London, you have this on your doorsteps, and you have this within your areas. There's something for me about a massive opportunity here for the Chilterns to really be at the forefront of making this difference and making sure we have access of equality physically by bringing nature to people's doorsteps. And that's my other challenge for the Chilterns. Don't just look within your boundaries. You can make a difference to the environment outside the Chilterns as well. You are a leader in this region, not just a leader within your designated boundary. So there are certainly lots of opportunities to create more access, bring nature close to doorsteps, use the planning system to create green infrastructure, green space, green school grounds, and so on. But there's also a massive opportunity for changing the way we reach out to the society, to changing the welcome we give to people, to changing the news we give to people, and even the faces, thinking about a new type of ranger service, thinking about a new type of wardening and an outreach service. So huge opportunities there to think about the different experiences people want from places like the Chilterns. We don't all just want to go for a 5-mile walk with a backpack anymore, even if we ever did. Let's really think about foraging, stargazing, health activities, really using our beautiful natural environment to reach the whole of society. That's my number 1 challenge. Have you levelled up access? My number 2 challenge is the economic one. It could be about jobs. I think Estelle mentioned the opportunities for this to be about recreating a different sort of, this could be a different sort of regional economy. It could be the place where there are more green jobs than anywhere else in the nation. The other side of economy that I'm thinking about is thinking about development. Of course, the Chilterns is protected from development to a higher extent than the countryside around it. That's one of the reasons for the designation. But development is also an opportunity for change. And I think there's a real opportunity to think about what is the right type of development within protected landscapes. What type of housing do we need? What type of small businesses do we need that reflect and build on the natural assets of the Chilterns? But also, again, my theme of the Chilterns, looking to what's going on outside. again, as at least as much as any of the other protected areas, you've got that development on your doorsteps, whether we like it or not, whether or not we want to try and stop the development. Once we know that development is going to happen, as Jonathan was talking about, there is an opportunity here to really think about how can that development be a change for good and create change. New policies like net gain, new opportunities with businesses like environmental infrastructure, real opportunities to think about how can we use development to improve our environment, create new habitat, offer new infrastructure, offer new opportunities to engage. So I guess that's my challenge. Don't be afraid of development. Think about how to get development right. Think about how to plan green from the start, and think about how to look at development across the landscape, not just worry about what's going on within the site. So if we get truly sustainable development, so we build greener as well as building faster, that's an opportunity in the Chilterns, not just a threat. And then I think my third theme is the environmental one. Jonathan's touched on some of the themes I might touch on as well, but for me, this is again a tipping point for us to say we don't protect our environment, we won't restore nature if we only worry about our designated sites and look within the boundaries of SSSIs and so on. We have to start looking beyond and joining up. But we also, as Howard hinted at, won't improve our environment, won't genuinely create resilient ecosystems if we don't accept and actively plan for some significant land use changes. So I think that will be my third sort of opportunity and challenge for the Chilterns. The local nature recovery strategies, of which of course one is being piloted within Buckinghamshire, gives us a chance to really proactively think and plan about the environment we want. Not in a top-down way by any means. The other power of local nature strategies, if we get them right, these can be a very bottom-up vehicle, a vehicle to learn what's out there in the environment that we don't know from the official records, to really get at that power of what local people know, but also what people want. And I hope that we can to start some difficult conversations about where are the trees going to go. We may need trees in a landscape we wouldn't have considered wooded in the past. Where are our other climate sinks going to do? And what are we going to do with farms? And to think about the environment being an asset on a farm and an opportunity for a new type of farm business. And not just think about the literal, just look at the margins of our fields, but let's start some dialogue about some changes in farm practices, changes in farm businesses that are a new asset for the farm, a new financial opportunity, but also a massive asset for society. So those are my challenges for you. Think bold, think big. And I'm going to replay my quote of the moment from Dan Ravens and Ellison for, I can't stop thinking about this. I heard it a year ago and it's still playing in my mind. He said, in times like this, times of change, times of worry, times of opportunity, you don't just think about what if. The question you ask yourself is why not?
Good. Thank you, Marian, and some really clear pointers there as to how we might move this thing forward. And I particularly like your grasping the nettle and being bold challenge. So thank you. I'd like to ask the same question of Pauline as well. Pauline, are you comfortable coming forward with that?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I'd like to just maybe reference a couple of the comments that have been made and fantastic comments earlier. Jonathan, I just want to say the bicycles should be the main means of movement. Having lived in Holland for a few years, I would say there it was absolutely the norm to use the bicycle rather than the car. So you were unusual using the car. So it can be done, and societies have done it. So I totally support that. And Howard, the new diversity of thinking, absolutely, I agree. We need that now. And Marian, I love the words being bold and being brave, because I think that's absolutely what we all need to do right now as well. So anyway, as a starters, obviously being CEO of a water company, our focus is on the water side of the Chilterns and this area of natural beauty. Last year, Affinity Water, we redefined our company's purpose, and we defined our purposes as providing high quality drinking water to our customers now and in the future, and taking care of the environment. So and taking care of the environment was very significant for us as a company, very significant for our employees, for our board, our shareholders, everybody, but it has really resonated well. And what we have very much tried to do since we have clarified that is to provide evidence that that is something that we are passionate about and we want to change. So for us, obviously, the The Chilterns is our source of water supply, and we're very aware of the impact that our abstraction in this area has on the environment. So we have committed to eliminating unsustainable abstraction from this environment, and particularly for the chalk streams. As you're all very well aware, these are very unique habitats, so 10 times more rare than coral reefs. We're very much lucky to have these within our area, but we need to take care of them. So we have, rested our hat on the fact that we are going to do what we can to revitalise the chalk streams. And as evidence of that, on World Rivers Day, we committed to, and we've actually turned off 2 abstraction points from those chalk streams near Chesham and Chartridge. And again, this was because, very much agreeing with what everybody is saying here today, this is not just a time for talk, this is a time for action. So we wanted to do something deliberate, something significant, and something which again wasn't forced upon us. It was something we volunteered to do. And for those outside of the water sector, that is quite significant, because we have a license, obviously, to supply water to our customers. This is a limited resource, and we have to make sure we can balance our supply and demand. So turning off any abstraction point takes a lot of work and effort and really thinking to make sure we can continue to supply our customers. But we have done that with the intent of improving the environment, and again, as I said, stopping sustainable abstraction. So how do we best work together? Well, I would say making that change already late in September, that required working with our regulators, with our local interest groups, and Elaine, you're with us on the day as well when we made that announcement at the end of September. And again, that was a great collaborative effort and something we absolutely want to continue going forward. I will add as well, I've invited Elaine to meet with our board at Affinity Water to make sure that they were hearing directly as well from critical and key stakeholders, and they understood the importance of what we're doing. And again, that was a great discussion, and I'm grateful for Elaine for doing that. So thinking going forward, this is all about thinking creatively and collaboratively, and it is about action. I do believe, and again, very much in line with the comments that we made earlier today, we have an obligation to all of our customers and all of the activities that we are doing and the money that we're spending, which is customers' money. It has to be with the interest of doing the right thing for our customers. So one of the things I think will be very important for all of us is to make the link for everybody with improving the environment. And again, if I just say we have done quite some research really and understanding attitudes to the environment. And one thing we need to be careful of is that all of our customers from all parts of our communities understand, recognize and appreciate the value of improving chalk streams. So one comment we had from a research group that we had, for example, one focus group, the person said, I can see how working class people are excluded from the countryside and nature-based stuff. They have less time and energy because of the nature of their labour. So maybe they don't want to go walking in the countryside because they've just done 50 hours of putting scaffolding up. So they're tired. So I think for us within Affinity, one of the things that we really think is very, very important now is for all of us to work together to really understand and engage all of our communities, all of our customers in the benefits of improving the environment. Some people at the moment are not seeing that direct link. And if we come back to one of the questions again you gave us beforehand that we've spent some time thinking about inside the company here as well, how did we manage to engage the whole world, or arguably in this COVID-19, in changing ways of working, changing practices and how we go about our work and everything else? That was basically, within days, the world changes working practices. How do we translate that now to the environment? Because it is now or never. This is our time where we really have to make sure we're engaging everybody in doing the right thing for the environment. And again, we think that the main reason that worked is because people absolutely understand the impact of their actions on others, on their families, on their communities. So they were willing to make those changes. And they could see what was in it for them, why it was important, and why it was important for them, for their families, and for them directly. I think it will be very important in everything that we want to do that we somehow are able to engage all parts of our community in understanding why this is important for all of us to make those improvements. So again, that's one of the things that we will try to do more of, and it is about engaging more communities. It's more about getting out more and really bringing everybody into this discussion. So the other point I would say working together is, and again, there was reference earlier on as well, is I think we can't stop development. We do need new housing, we do need to continue development, but it's about doing it in the right way. And again, we have been very active and again, we all need to work together to make sure that we do get new regulations that supports sustainable development. So there's a lot of talk about energy efficient housing. Affinity Water, we've been driving very hard with the government, with our regulators, to have water efficient housing as well. So water is absolutely a scarce resource. You know, the less water we can take out of the environment, the better for the environment. So we should be having building regulations which, you know, has water efficient housing, and also we should be making it the law that all household products using water are labelled as with their water efficiency, same as you have for energy efficiency. So these are something I think we can all work together to put pressure on the government and legislation to make those changes, which will have a direct impact on the environment. So I think that's really it. And again, I love that quote. I love that quote. The last quote. I would say one quote that we use, or I've used many times over my career, is the Charles Darwin quote. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one that's most adaptable to change. And I think now we all have to be adaptable and to get on board with the change.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pauline. Completely agree. And I love the notion of, I think it's really important that the notion of making it personal is the way to drive change, because I think that's what people respond to. So thanks very much, and thanks for your thinking in advance on that question, which is a really key question. What I'd like to do now is just pick through some of the questions that have come in advance, or at least part of those questions, and where I can, tie them into some of the questions that are coming into the chat bar. And I want to go back, clearly the Chilterns, like any landscape in the UK, is a product of human endeavour. These aren't natural landscapes. These are products of farming, forestry, industry, business, and all sorts of activity over the millennia. And the Chilterns is no different to any of those other landscapes. So there's a particular question that I'd like to ask around commercial activity and the primary sectors, agriculture and forestry. So how will a green recovery work with farmers and foresters to deliver a farmed environment for the future? And I wanted to pick up on Jonathan's point around regenerative agriculture and the point that's been raised in the chat bar around organic farming. And for me, there's a huge link here with water quality. So I just wondered if we could talk through some of the, what do you see as future farming for this area? And how can we help that process how can we help that process evolve? And Estelle started off by talking about the value of the elms, the future farming system. So general question about farming, if I can start with Estelle, you look ready to go there, then I'd be grateful.
I just unmuted, I wasn't sure, I was all revving up.
Please, okay. Estelle. So if you can give us your quick and best thinking on this, because we've got about half an hour to get through these questions. Thank you.
Right, okay, so it has to be farming with nature if we are going to bring nature's recovery and a green recovery about in a pretty short amount of time. The elms new system, hopefully that will deliver what we need it to deliver in terms of that sort of bigger frame. But I think, this is a time of opportunity, and the guys have talked about that. And farmers could actually take this into their own hands now. You've raised the whole sort of organic piece there. And, farming with nature actually does provide many benefits to agriculture, not least in their bottom line. So this is about producing quality food that actually does, when you take it to market, command a premium price. And of course, you know, then you've got the way that the land is managed. So it's better for soil, better for water quality, better for biodiversity, and building landscape resilience. So I think the key ingredients are all there, and I don't think that farmers have to wait to be told what to do. Clearly, it would be better if there was some level of subsidy support for that. But actually, I think there is definitely a local economy there that could be driven by our local farmers to stimulate local products and different services, you know, opening up their land for tourism. There's a whole range of different things that farmers could do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Estelle. And I'm going to ask the same question of Jonathan, but I'm going to pick up on something you said, Estelle, which is around premium price. And how do we factor in environmental justice into the way we produce our food at the local level? So it's an added layer to the question, which I'm sure Jonathan can handle. Thank you.
Can I respond to a different point first, which is just on forestry? Amazing opportunity. 1 million houses, at least half of them should be made from timber. We need a forestry in this country equivalent to, just like Pauline lived in the Netherlands, I lived in Sweden for 4 years, and they have a proper forestry industry, and major companies. Stora Enso is a £10 billion company. We're building houses in the Chilterns, and I'd like to build them all out of timber. So the supply chain side of it's really critical. In terms of price, look, there's a load of bollocks talked about the premium cost of organic and local. Really, the amount of money that's taken out of the value chain from transport and supermarkets and packaging and refrigeration and handling, by comparison to hyper-local, hyper-intense, sustainable farming, if that were made available to the farmer, who gets a tiny proportion of the value of the what's on the fork, then it could revolutionize farming.
Thank you. Really, really, really helpful. I'm minded of a trip that I made to Norway many years ago, where I was told when I first landed there, do not only buy local produce. It's so cheap compared to the imported goods. Don't get sucked into buying imported goods. And I could never understand why we didn't have the same system in the UK. So thank you. I'm going to come across Marian to see if you have any views on that, because I'm aware you're having to dip out at 11. So sustainable farming, how do we move that forward?
I think one of the ways we move it forward, Howard, is by giving farmers more freedom. And I think my hope of the ELM scheme, of course I'm worried about what the ELM scheme will encompass in terms of the details, and we are expecting more news on that from DEFRA imminently in Novemberish time. I think for me, the ELM scheme is not just a chance to think about what are the goods we want to pay for, it's also a chance to reset the relationship between farming and government and the rest of society.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I think we've lost you, Marian, temporarily. Okay, while Marian unfreezes herself, I'm going to move to Pauline, if you're comfortable with that. And there's a clear link between the inferences around sustainable intensification, organic and water quality. And I just wondered if you had any views on that. And we'll come back to Marian if she comes in. So sorry, Marian.
Sure.
Pauline.
So yes, Howard, we do think there's a lot more that can be done between, again, water companies and farming.
Sorry, Marian, you disappeared for a second, so we've just quickly moved to Pauline, and then we'll come back to you if you're okay with that.
Yes, I'll finish quickly, and then
okay. Shall I
okay,
continue?
and then you'll vanish. Yeah. Okay. Hang on 2 seconds. I think Marian's speaking, so this is a typical Zoom meet. Marian, we can't hear you at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but you're out of sync. So Marian, if you'd like to try to explain where you were at, and then that will give you an opportunity to move away, and then Pauline can come in. Sorry, go for it. Sorry, Pauline.
Apologies. I was talking about using the ELM scheme as an opportunity to ensure that farmers can use their environmental assets as a business opportunity and make some significant changes in foresting, in rewilding, and in making the environment as much a part of the farm business as food and fibre, and using that to reset the relationship and the rules we apply to farming, and to make it feel like a collaborative partnership rather than a being told what to do. I hope you got that. The screen seems to be frozen.
I got all of that. No, perfectly, heard that very clearly. So thank you, Marian. Really helpful. Okay, so Pauline, can I move back to you as well? Thank you, Marian.
Yes, so we're working with, we think there are more opportunities to work with the farming community as well. What that we have been focused on more recently is on incentivizing farmers to grow cover crops between harvests. Again, that's very much linked to your sustainable farming question. By growing cover crops, what we're doing is, well, there's a form of carbon sequestration that is happening. We're also improving the soil health, but more importantly for water quality, it's avoiding soil erosion and the leaching of nitrates and fertilizers into our aquifers, which then go into our rivers and cause issues with our rivers, with weeds and growth. And then we have to treat that as well then afterwards when we go to treat the water before it goes to our customers. So anything that we can do to encourage farmers to grow the cover crops and to keep all of that within the soil is good news for water quality. And there's some of the things we have been trialing in the last couple of years. We've done end trade, a sort of a reverse auction process to, again, as I said, to incentivize farmers to do that. So from our side, yes, the more we can keep within the less fertilizer that's and artificial ingredients that are leaching into our water supply, that is going to the rivers, going directly into the aquifers, the better for the environment, the less energy in treating, and generally the more healthy our chalk streams. So we think there are opportunities to do more there, and we've started some of that engagement.
That's great. Thank you, Pauline. And there's a comment in the sideline from Nick, which I fully agree with, stating that we talk about farms and farming, but not about farmers. And this comes back to Marian's point for me, which is about establishing the potential for establishing some kind of new social contract between farmers, society, and the way we do business and the way we manage land. So thanks for that comment, Nick. Thanks for your individual comments. Just moving along, I wanted to pick up on something that we're all aware of, but also has come up in the chat bar. And I probably won't do the question justice, but we know we've seen a lot of visitors to the countryside over the course of the last 7 or 8 months. People have, reduced their travel abroad or stopped their travel abroad. And we've seen huge numbers of people, quite often different visitors, visiting a lot of our areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks, wildlife trust reserves, and so on. That's something that we're dealing with on a regular basis. There's been damage associated with that. And on the other side of the argument, we have big periods where people weren't coming in and out of the countryside. So the first question I wanted to ask is, what thoughts do the panel have in ensuring that we welcome all sections of society to these national landscapes? We've got new visitors coming. And conversely, did anyone notice any environmental benefits that came about as a result of reduced access early on, and how do we marry those two things together? So I don't know if anyone particularly wants to go first on that. Estelle, you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted now. Well, simply because I have quite a strong opinion about this. As major landowners across the 3 counties have got about 2,500 hectares of land, which on the back of a pandemic and people sort of coming out of towns and cities it's been really hard to manage. We're always welcoming people. We're kind of open door to folks coming and experiencing nature firsthand. But I think there's a level of education that that is missing, actually, in the way that people treat the countryside, and that distinction between what is a nature reserve and what is a park. And actually, we did send wardens out to talk to people and you know, just trying to understand why people were there, and they wanted to come out and have a barbecue, and unfortunately, you know, that led to fires on nature reserves, ponies being lassoed with dog leads, and, you know, all sorts of different things, and nests being trampled on, people swimming in lakes, and, you know, where there's nesting birds, and, you know, it was absolutely heartbreaking. So there was a massive direct negative impact while people were coming out. But, you know, while we were in lockdown itself and people weren't out and about as much, actually, anecdotally, you know, wildlife did better. It was springtime and there were improvements. You know, we saw more flowers come through, more animals became kind of visible, so they came out of hiding. It was extraordinary, actually, the difference between the two. So it's cost us a lot of money, and I think that's the other thing for anybody who does manage land. It costs a lot of money to manage antisocial behaviour. So there is something we're going to have to do here around education. And on all levels, and that's probably something that we could talk to Marian about, is how people actually treat the countryside. And I know that they're, you know, developing a new countryside code, so that would be very helpful. But it's been really difficult to manage, Howard, really difficult.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I think a lot of people understand exactly what you've been going through. So thank you, Estelle. I just want to welcome Andrew, who's come in following Marian's move to a DEFRA meeting. Welcome, Andrew. I won't drop straight in it by asking you a question, but I will come to you in a second. So we're talking about access and the impact of numbers of people coming, both positive and the positive impact of reduced visitor numbers, the positive impact of increased numbers, and the negative issues associated with both. So I'll come to you in a minute. But would anyone else like to come in on this issue of access and the impact over the course of the last 8-9 months? Jonathan, you're looking ready to move.
Sure, I think it's very difficult, as Estelle has found, to deal with a rapid influx of people who perhaps never before in their lives have had access to sensitive environments because they've not been welcomed. It's not part of our everyday culture across social class. And again, a Swedish example is that children from preschool onwards outdoors maybe 25% of their time. It begins from the age of 2 and carries on all the way through school. So for me, creating a culture of familiarity with nature. I mean, some children don't know what a nettle is. They walk into an area of nettles in a field and will get stung and are horrified, which shows the kind of how abstract it's become for many urban children, and particularly poorer, disadvantaged families. So I think to prioritize nurseries and schools, investment in getting children from the earliest ages into not just nature reserves, but into open space and green space to appreciate the weather and the wider world around us is critically important. Because again, in Sweden, we don't have that antisocial behaviour in quite that way. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's just culturally would be seen to be extraordinary, as it were. And I realise, you know, you can't change the entire culture of a nation or the politics quickly, but culture is a created thing. It's not inherited. It's not in our DNA. And therefore, if we begin in the earliest years with you know, major investment in environmental education and being outdoors, for me, that's the priority. But it will take time.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Pauline, did you want to come in on this? There's no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like just to add to that. I think I've got sort of two views on that one. One related to mental health, and the other related to social mobility, which was touched on. what we've definitely seen over the last 6 months is there is a strong correlation between mental health benefits and people being out in the environment. So I appreciate that there will have been many people who've been out who may need education on how best to respect the environment and nature. I absolutely get that. But I do think there's something there. We're spending huge amounts of money on the NHS. And we know we have issues there. We haven't yet been able to quantify the impact, the benefits on being out in the environment, on mental health, and on health in general. But certainly there's some work to be there going forward. If we could combine those two efforts and be able to have that direct link, I think that would be very helpful. The other point on sort of the poor, disadvantaged families and giving them that access and opening up their minds and opportunities. There was a survey that came out last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, by the Social Mobility Commission, and interestingly indicated the place with the lowest social mobility in the country is Chesham and Amersham, which is really quite shocking. And what it's saying is people, a 20-year-old there today who grew up and was on free school meals is today average income of less than £7,000. And that's just half of somebody in the same situation in Wigan. So, I mean, that for me is really shocking that in such an area, you've got such poor social mobility. So again, I think there's a link there with the environment, allowing people access, not just allowing them access, but encouraging access into the environment to open the minds and the opportunities and sort of hopefully encourage both the social mobility side and the art of the possible for people, as well as, excuse me, the health benefits. There's something more to be done there, I think, but that has to be the direction we go, that we're encouraging people to get out more.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Pauline, and I completely agree. Andrew, can I move to you now? Are you comfortable
yes,
coming in on this question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
And welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Just to introduce myself very quickly, I work with Marian at Natural England. I'm the area manager for this part of the world, so know the Chilterns really well. In fact, my career in the natural environment began in this area. I was the footpaths officer, the rights of way officer for part of Buckinghamshire that included the Chilterns, so got to know the nooks and crannies, the Chilterns really well back sort of 20, 30 years ago, crikey, and absolutely fell in love with the place then. I think the question about access is very, very dear to my heart, and I think there is a moment now this year that this awful pandemic has presented an opportunity for us all really who work in the natural environment. And I recognise fully what Estelle said about all the difficulties it brought when the limitations and restrictions were lifted and people flooded out, and we experienced quite a lot of problems on our national nature reserves that Natural England manages. However, I would say that these are the people that for many, many years we have been trying to connect with, aren't they? We've been saying for a long time, how do we get to people rather than kind of our usual customers and try and get that engagement with nature? And over the last few months, we've had that. People really valued their bit of time outdoors, and it's kind of what they did. It's where they went when the restrictions were lifted. They went out into the places that they heard of. And yes, it meant that there was a lot of people going to the same places because they'd heard of those particular landmarks and places. And that caused those kind of problems and unsocial activity that we heard a lot about. But nevertheless, that value that people placed upon nature and the outdoors is something I think that we that have been lobbying so hard for the right investment and the right policies need to use now and make sure that the decisions that are made at the most highest level actually recognise the value that people place on nature, and that we can get that connection and manage it make sure it is in a manageable way. So I do think we mustn't lose this opportunity and see it as a negative thing. We must actually continue to engage with people. And when we relaunch the Countryside Code, yes, make sure that it's done in a way that is welcoming and positive and not about what you can't do in the countryside, but what you can, and try and make sure that's as accessible to as many people as possible.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very powerful. Estelle, yes, you'd like to come in again.
I was just going to come in there. One of the things that we have done, I mean, recognise that yes, there have been negative impacts, but also recognising that people have reconnected with nature during this time. We moved very quickly to putting digital packs together, toolkits for people, so they could actually download it, go out into their local communities. and get involved in nature that way. You know, so a lot of self-guided stuff, and people have loved it. And actually for us, it's really opened our eyes. You know, it's kind of a complete revelation. It's really cheap to do, but the feedback has been absolutely fantastic from people. So there's more of that and more to come with our education service as well. We've got 4 education centres and they're primarily closed at the moment. Schools aren't coming out. So we're going to have to go to them. You know, we're not giving up. We're just saying, right, we're going to have to engage with you in a completely different way. And that's working. That's been really good, really positive. So there are ways of doing this, but it just has to be super local for people.
Thank you. And it comes back to the super local over and over again, I think. So really helpful. We've got probably 5 minutes, a little bit more of question time. And I think it would be remiss of me not to touch on a development type question, particularly where you are. So the question is, how much should a green recovery dictate levels of growth across the Chilterns, particularly in light of 1 million new houses proposed across the Oxcam arc? And I know Jonathan's already commented on this, but I'd like to pull this together with a broader question around the role of an AONB in stimulating and supporting more sustainable development within its patch. So I don't know if anyone has would like to start off on this, particularly linked to discussions around changes to the planning system that are going on at the moment. Any starters?
Well, I'm quite happy to have a go.
Please.
So yes, I mean, we've been kind of on the front line of this, fighting inappropriate development. I'll say that is inappropriate development. And I think for us, the starting point of kind of this has been missed in a way, because we never really worked out what the carrying capacity of the area was, and the, you know, the environmental, the shock that would cause to the environment. You know, if we're talking about building this amount of homes, you know, is there water supply there? You know, where, how are we going to build a low carbon economy on that? How are we going to plan for nature, space? You know, how are people going to move around? You know, got the transport issue. So for us, it was a major issue. And then the way that the piecemeal approach that's been taken to it, I think if there was kind of a, you know, an overarching vision about what this was going to look like, instead of that piecemeal kind of authority by authority approach, and then you've got the expressway sort of, you know, steaming all the way through it. And we ended up taking the government to court on that, simply because they missed out, you know, crucial points in that planning for that road. So I'm not saying that we're anti-development at all at the Wildlife Trust. It just has to be done appropriately. But we do really have to question, you know, 1 million homes, 1 million new homes. And given the pandemic has kind of thrown society into a different way of living now, you know, how long is that going to stay with us? Is the future going to be the same? Do we really need that many homes? Do we want people to move around in the same way? All of those office spaces that have been built, can we convert those into housing for people? I think there's just a different way of looking at this now. I think society has kind of shifted on almost. So yeah, it's a debate that's going to rumble on, no doubt, as well as the green belt. So let's probably not go there today. But there you go. It has to be the right kind of development, building with nature as opposed to against it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, anyone else would come in on that? Jonathan?
Look, could it be done sustainably? Yes. Is it likely to be? No, for any number of reasons, many of which Estella's already identified. I think we just lack the skill and expertise in land use planning at this kind of scale, and indeed a development industry that has really absorbed the values that you need to work in this kind of way. And so I think that the serious risk is that we end up creating a whole series of tracks of volume house builder, car dependent, road dependent schemes, because that's what the industry does. And you know, there'll be more trees, there'll be slightly more water efficient, there'll be slightly more carbon efficient as individual homes. That's easy to do. But when you look at the total footprint, quite apart from my earlier point about handprint, about the positive regenerative impact that could happen, it will be immense with the kind of planning that we're experiencing at the moment, in my view. I've already argued that, and we said this in a meeting with Michael Gove, that when he was Environment Secretary, that to build a sustainable city for at least half of those homes would be a far more environmentally sensitive way of addressing these issues, more socially inclusive, more affordable, more economically wise, more innovation, easier to do, faster to do, and could change the sector with a step change in terms of the quality of what we do. Very unlikely to happen, I completely accept that. And so I fear that we'll, particularly with the planning reforms, which I don't think are going to help in this regard, not just the algorithm, but the whole notion of how on earth do you code for the fine grain of sustainable urbanism that we need? Because it isn't about what buildings look like. I feel very deeply about what they look like, but that's not really the issue. The issue is, how do places work? How do we create communities? How do we create walkability, cyclability? How do we connect with nature? And I think we just don't have at the moment, sadly, the sophistication really to handle it, actually. Sorry to be a bit nihilistic.
So, no, thank you. And I think that's a very honest response. And I just to set Elaine's mind at rest, I'll shorten my summing up. So don't worry about that, Elaine. We will get these questions in.
Howard, can I just make a final point?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine.
You
just
can,
on biodiversity net gain, because that's being held up as sort of the panacea here to to all of these. It's okay to take biodiversity out. Oh, it's fine. It's we're going to put it. It's all about net gain, but that's untested at the moment, and the scale that we're talking at here, the scale of destruction that will occur, it's beyond repair. I don't think in anybody's kind of lifetime we're going to see that change. I just don't think it's the answer. I think it could contribute, but I don't think it's the answer.
No, and I personally agree with you completely on that. Thank you, and thanks, Estelle. I just wanted to come back to Jonathan when you sort of left it at a sort of hanging in a relative negative space. I just wondered if you were to look all over the world, if you had access to the best thinking in the world around creating places that work, where should we be looking?
You have to go to the Netherlands, which in many ways is a really dull landscape, actually, and has very bad old-style chemical farming everywhere, very intense. But in terms of urban planning and the quality of environments that are created, and Pauline talked about how cycling is the first mode of choice. So the Netherlands, certainly Denmark, probably overtaking the Netherlands at the moment. Quite a lot of growth in Denmark, actually, and new communities of ecologically friendly timber settlements being planned and designed by some of the world's leading architects and urban designers. And we use some of those people in our schemes over here because they're miles ahead of where our professionals are in the way that they think about natural places and building.
Thank you. That's great. Pauline, you look like you're going to come in on that one.
Well, to be honest, I'm probably going to challenge some of those sentiments and say it's unlikely to happen, and we don't have the sophistication to deal with it. I think it's not rocket science what we're talking about. As you've said, people have done it elsewhere, so I was sort of challenged why, if it can be done elsewhere, why can't it be done here? And I again, probably from sort of my background, my inclination is if somebody says something's not possible, you want to prove that it is. So I'd probably turn it around and say, well, what do we need to do to make it happen, rather than saying it's probably unlikely to happen. It feels to me that we have an opportunity here. We have increased awareness of the importance of the environment. We have the green recovery being talked about. We have politicians sort of lining up to support all of these initiatives. I guess my challenge back to all of us is how do we make sure that development is sustainable, as opposed to that it will continue as it's always been done. I think we need to maybe make some of our voices louder at this point in time, because if we don't get those changes made now, you know, this is the time for change and new thinking and innovation and so on. So I probably put it back to us to say, what are we going to do to make sure it is developed sustainably and in the right way? I do think the idea is there. I do think there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of intent to do the right thing. But we just somehow need to harness it and make that voice maybe louder.
Thank you, and that's a really nice positive response to Jonathan's earlier. Andrew, would you like to come in on this, or are you happy to keep out of this one?
Very briefly, Howard. Yeah, just to follow the thread of this being seen as an opportunity. If there is this kind of pressure and demand for housing along the scale that Jonathan talked about, the kind of million houses, then we've got to kind of work together, haven't we, to really present a vision for how this could be done in a good way, so that nature actually benefits from. No, I've never been to Copenhagen, but that kind of vision of a new Copenhagen in this part of the world sounds to me to be the kind of vision that might capture the imagination for us all to work together. And the people on this call, the people listening in, I think are the people that need to kind of have that joint vision and that kind of united power to work with developers and planners to make sure that we do have something that actually nature can benefit from. And there is an opportunity right now, because we're at the ground floor on this. It is early days and we can see that we are beginning to work together. And it may be, we'd rather this didn't happen at all, but if it is, then how can we make sure that nature benefits? I think having a clear vision for something that is radical and different, that we've all had a hand in planning, I think is the way to go.
It's quite interesting.
Thank you, Andrew.
Howard, if I may, just a quick comeback. I'm not. I feel very positive. I just have a different view about what positive means. But to come back to what Andrew's just said, we actually recommended a city of the size of Copenhagen to Michael Gove's Commission for Sustainable Business, and they adopted it. And so some of the leading business thinkers in sustainability in this country recommended a city for that area as the primary means of meeting the housing need. So it was seen as a business, a sustainable business mission, not just as as it were, as a development mission or a planning mission. They really got it, and that was quite exciting, because these business people are a bit fearless in a sense. They're all very successful entrepreneurs and running quite big businesses, and they were all up for the step change, Pauline, that you're asking for. That's for sure. That was fascinating, that aspect of it.
Great. No, thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions in a few minutes. The last question, the general question, relates to nature recovery, but I just want you to limit it to one idea. So we're clearly in a parlous state with regards to our nature recovery with regards to nature at a global level. Estelle made the point really clearly at the beginning, and I totally support that. So the Chilterns is a designated landscape. What's the top item on your list that needs to happen within the Chilterns to help address the issue of nature recovery? It's not the solution, and I'm not asking for guidance for the team, because this is an area. This is an area that over which there is a joint responsibility. So what's the one thing on the top of your list that needs to happen in this AONB in order to help address nature recovery? And I'll start with Estelle, because I can hear her moving already. So.
Okay. Well, you need a recovery roadmap, basically, and you know where the assets are. You know what's possible. I would think your team do know what's possible. You've got the glove review as well, sort of in your back pocket. But more investment, I think, crucially is needed. I mean, this is a landscape designation that we're talking about. The designation was never really for wildlife and for biodiversity, so maybe something strengthened in the background there, but definitely more investment and more planning.
Thank you very much. No, that's great. Thank you. And I'll come back to that in the summing up. So very important. Thank you. Jonathan, what's the one thing top of your list?
Incredible network of cycle lanes. So not a road map, but a bike map.
Excellent. Thank you. Pauline.
Well, I was going to cheat and build on Estelle's idea to have a roadmap, because then we can put everything into the roadmap. But so we'd have the chalk streams, your sustainable development, your bicycle tracks, and getting communities involved. But if you force me to pick one, for me, it has to be the chalk streams. So making sure we revitalise the chalk streams, because that brings in so much else as well.
That's great. Thank you. Andrew, your one thing.
Yeah, well, for me, I think it would be key to be working with the farming community. So farming and farmers, I think, given the land ownership and how the land is managed, in terms of an immediate way we can make a practical difference, I think it's the investment in farming and the right kind of production, and that kind of connection between food and nature and people, I think, is pretty critical. So that's where I would start.
Brilliant, thank you. And before I come to you all with a final question, just as an observation on that, we do have an AONB management plan in each AONB, and that should be the roadmap for that place. So there's a question there to Natural England about how we form our next management plans across the country, how they take into account multimodal transport initiatives, how they work with farmers and landowners, and how they deal with the data and the evidence required to support key environmental change around habitats such as chalk streams and so on. So really, really important point from my perspective. So thank you. So I'm going to ask you all one question each. And this is, you know, you've had this discussion, you've reflected on the questions, you've seen a lot of the questions and the comments that have come up in the sidebar. What's the one thing you're going to change or do differently, either personally or professionally, following this event? Who wants to start? I've been picking on Estelle because she's at the top of my screen, so I'm hesitating to do that again. Pauline, do you want to start?
To be honest, I really love the comments of some of the other panelists here. So actually, what I plan to do is to talk to some of you about some of the things you've talked about, the ideas from the sustainable city, the roadmap that Estelle talked about, and the farming side from Andrew. I'd like to understand more, because I do think there's something here about creating a vision for the future, incorporating some of those in to be able to have a compelling story and have a louder voice.
Thank you, Pauline. Very clear. Who'd like to go next?
There's something very clearly come out, and certainly in the chat bar about local connection to wildlife and local communities and kids, and you know, how do we get people engaged and outside in a way that is not damaging to the environment. But I don't know, I'm going to go away and reflect on that a little bit more, because as a wildlife trust we do engage with people, but it's now this moment of people rediscovering nature and making sure that we capture that and do the most that we can to encourage people to keep engaged, but find a way to help people access the countryside in a sustainable way.
No, thank you, Estelle. Okay, Andrew, you're looking ready to speak.
Yes, thanks, Howard. I think just being a little bit sneaky, one of the kind of things that we're changing is something we've already begun to do in light of the publication of the AONB management plan. That is to work with Elaine and colleagues on actually practical tasks and doing those together, rather than having sort of forums and discussions. We really want to kind of get on and do stuff. So we are already on the back of the publication of the management plan, beginning to work together in those kind of small groups and look at practical actions. But in direct answer to your question, Howard, about what I will do differently, I think I do need to educate myself a bit more about some of the kind of more radical thinking about big scale planning that Jonathan's talked about, so I can go into those discussions perhaps a bit more informed about what the alternatives might be.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. And Jonathan?
Probably in contrast to everyone else, I spend less time in these forums. I spend most of my time in a spreadsheet, it seems, or legal work on, and actually being able to listen more to the multiplicity of ideas and local expertise on these kinds of issues is really an important thing for me. So absolutely, Andrew, on the action, but I need a little bit more involvement. I think, just personally.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. So First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your contribution, and also like to thank everybody that's been feeding into the sidebar. I haven't managed to do that justice because trying to watch people's faces and read notes and do other things is clearly beyond me, but I just want to thank you for that, and we will keep a record of what's been said. So really, thank you to the panelists for such a clear and open discussion. Elaine asked me to sum up within a few minutes. I'm never going to be able to do that justice, but what I thought I'd do before I hand back to Elaine is just give you really some observations from my perspective, trying to share this. Those listening may not be aware, but the questions were neatly broken down into access, nature recovery, development and farming. And what struck me really clearly was that actually all of those questions were answered all at the same time by many different panelists. So there was a great crossover between the sectors. So I would argue that our boxing off and labelling in relation to the way we manage our natural environment is erroneous, because the nature of the conversation doesn't support that. And for me, that led to some thinking around the equality, the diversity discussion that we had around access. And I think we're very, very willing and practiced in compartmentalizing and labeling not only the way we deal with our natural environment, but the way we deal with people. And those of us involved in policy development are very good at prescribing what needs to happen. What we don't do very well is describe what needs to happen. So we're more prescriptive than descriptive. And what came out very strongly, particularly for Marian's contributions, was the need for that collective vision, that shared description of what it is we want, with less emphasis on the prescription. So that came over to me very strongly. I think Jonathan's opening lines around a philosophical framework really struck me. Actually, fundamentally, everything is fundamentally associated with the way we organize ourselves and the economy. And I think there is a real opportunity under the heading of green recovery to take a step back and revision what that means, and particularly look at the relationship between sectors and society in general. So what does that what does that new social contract look like? I take the common message that comes through around grasping the nettle, being bold and brave. The point that Pauline made, if it has been done elsewhere, why can't it be done here? For me, is really a really powerful statement. And I think just to finalise, collaboration has been mentioned a few times. I think there's a host of people sitting around this virtual table that could add great value by working closely together. Some of you do anyway, we know that. But I think there's a host of people that we need to plug into in the world of AONBs that we don't necessarily always do, that could bring a great deal of insight and force for good into what it is we're doing. So I really feel that. And also just looking at the quality of the discussions that have been taking place in the sidebar, there's a huge amount that we need to learn and listen to in relation to our constituencies across the country. And for me, that's the management planning process and the process we use and employ to gather information and intelligence to inform that plan. So I'm not going to say much more than that, other than it's been for me, it's been a really interesting discussion to watch, listen to, and try to compare. Thank again to all of those that have taken part, including those in the sidelines. And I'm going to hand over now to Elaine, who's going to explain what's happening next and where we're at the local AONB level. So thank you, Elaine.
Thank you, Howard. And thank you to you all. Thank you to our panel and to the audience. As you said, Howard, it's been what we hoped for, really, a really rich discussion. And for us, it's very much about capturing the conversation, capturing all the opportunities and challenges that have come out of this conversation. And this is very much part of a journey for us, for all of us, not just us as an organisation, but it's about continuing the conversation. And Howard really brilliantly summed up, so I won't even try and do that because I've made some notes and Howard, you covered it. So I think it really is just for us to build on what we've done here. It is very much part of a conversation, but it's the action as well that we've all talked about. You know, we can talk here now, but we need to take action as well. And that's very front of mind for us as an organisation. The whole network of AONBs are very much mindful that we are really in a good place in many ways to take the action we need. And we've got the support from our partners, from people that are on the panel, from, you know, Natural England through to all the businesses that we work with. So we are in a strong position, and it's very much about you all as our audience, the people that live and work in the Chilterns. It's, you know, your voices and your views are also really important. So we'll take all this away. There were lots of questions we couldn't answer. We'll think about how we can continue to engage with you all and answer those questions and work with you. So yes, it's really just for me to say thank you. And I should also say thank you to my team, because a lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make these events happen. So thank you to Kath and to Lynn and to Vicky and to others who've made sure it's all run smoothly. Hi, Kath. And Lynn is behind the logo at the bottom of it, but Lynn's our tech expert and makes sure everything runs smoothly for us. So, you know, very much appreciate what the team does. They're an amazing bunch. I know some of you will work with them directly or indirectly. Yeah, they're great, and I'm very lucky to be working with them. So yes, I just want to say thank you, and stay in touch. Let us know if there's anything else that we think we can do with you. And yeah, thank you. So I will draw the session to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine.
Right.